The door to her bedroom opened, and without a moment's hesitation, she ran towards him and threw her arms around his neck, holding on tight. She felt his body go rigid with stunned surprise and buried her face into the crook of his neck. Then she felt his arms come around her tentatively, as if unsure of how to hold her. Vine wrapped her own tighter around his neck, standing on her toes, leaning her entire weight into him, pressed into him like that for the first time. His arms slowly held her tighter, one around her waist, the other coming up to the back of her head. Did something happen? He asked in a quiet, almost soothing whisper, the husky and deep voice right next to her ear. Overcome with all the emotion bursting inside her, her eyes leaking, she shook her head. You okay? His tone relaxed silently. She nodded into his neck. She could feel his confusion at the way she was behaving, but for once, she didn't care. She deserved to hold someone who cared for her as he did. He deserved to be held by someone who cared for him as she did. Without another word, he picked her up and moved in the direction of the seating area. Vine clung to the strong muscles in his neck, her legs hanging in the air. He turned, sitting down on the same couch she had been sitting on, and Vine bent her legs to accommodate, straddling him, feeling the gun at his waist press inside her thigh, still holding in the space between his neck and shoulder. She could smell his musky scent and his cologne mixed around his pulse, feel the vein throbbing against her cheeks as she nuzzled into him, feel his soft hair against her hands as she ran her fingers through the strands. His heart beat against her breasts, crushed into his chest. His warm muscles felt hard against every curve of hers. His arms tight around her smaller frame, didn't move, not to stroke, not to explore, not to do anything. After minutes and minutes of holding him, and him allowing her to hold him without complaint, Vine pulled her face out of his neck and looked at his Adam's apple, exposed by the unbuttoned collar of his white shirt. Letting her eyes travel upwards, she finally locked her gaze with his. Those brown hazel eyes made her sigh softly. They were patient, not in the alert way of hunters that he usually has for others, but in a softer, much tender way. He was waiting for her to explain her bizarre behavior of crying after seeing him. Vine moved her hands to the side of his face, cupping his jaw in her palms, feeling that scrapping against her palm in that delicious way, and told him in 2 words, with every motion strangling her heart, "Thank you." His brows furrowed, just minutely, as he tilted his head slightly to the left, trying to figure her out. After a minute, he asked, "What for?" Vine stroked his cheek with her thumbs. "For being with me." He didn't get it. Of course he didn't. How could he? He knew about her past, how miserable her life was before he came into her life. He completely changed the axis of her story by marrying her, taking care of her, and especially respecting her. All her life, she needed someone to love her. She never wished for fancy cars, houses, and a luxurious lifestyle. just someone who could tell her that she is needed. She needs to stay alive for them. She didn't have anyone until he came into her life. Before Jungkook came back home after the mission, she had a dream. A nightmare to be precise, about her past. Once again, those memories and traumas came back to haunt her in her dreams, which she tried so hard to remove from her life. Jungkook didn't know how much he changed her life. He could never know what she feels every day when she is in his embrace, knowing that she is loved by someone, that someone wants her to stay alive. He didn't get it because he didn't know how it had tilted her world on its axis again, how it had split her chest open, how it had warmed her to the bone in a way she knew she could never be cold or alone again. And she wouldn't be able to convey it to him, to tell him any of it. So she did it in the only way she could, in that moment. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. He stilled, completely stilled. His hands tightened slightly on the side of her hips, but he sat frozen under her. Vine didn't care. She held him with all the affection she felt for him in her heart, and tilted her head, pouring it into that one kiss. She nipped at his lips, sipped from them, kissed them gently, reverently, giving him tenderness she knew he had never received in his life. He let her. He let her shower him and received it, accepted it. Didn't kiss her back, but didn't push her away. Wine tasted his lips the way she had wished to when he was on a mission. Tilting her head to the other side, she fit their lips together again, locking them for a moment before sucking at his lower lip, feeling the scruff on his chin rubbing against her skin, the bristles around his mouth against hers. But then someone knocked on the door. Wine pulled away from the simplest, most beautiful of kisses and stared deep into his eyes. You, she whispered to the space between them. Jeon Jungkook are a most beautiful, beautiful man, and my heart beats for you. The confusion and surprise in his face were priceless. This was not the Mafia. This was her loving husband at the moment. Without another word, Vine stood up. It was proof of his shock that he let her. She opened the door and their maid looked at her. The dinner is ready, her maid said in a low whisper, for which a reply came. Can we have a moment? The deep voice asked from behind her, addressing the maid. The maid smiled at Jungkook and walked out the door wordlessly. Vine turned to ask what he wanted to talk about when suddenly she was slammed into the wall beside the door. She looked up, baffled, barely catching her breath, only catching a fleeting glimpse of the wild look on his face before his mouth crashed down over hers. Her toes curled into her shoes. Her fingers going around his tight waist, feeling the gun tucked to the side of his trousers under her palm. Body catching fire, heart thundering in her chest. Vine caved to him like sand under an ocean wave. His hands twisted in her hair, tilting her head back as he devoured her mouth. The kiss was nothing like the one minutes ago. It was harsh, almost bruising in its intensity. but the undercurrent of something unfamiliar ran through them. She still felt his confusion in the kiss, but there was something else there too. Something precious, something she couldn't understand, and he was trying to tell her. She parted her lips gladly as his tongue swept through them, dripping inside her mouth before pulling out. His entire body pressed into hers, into the walls, feet to feet, hips to hips, chest to breasts. As he leaned down and she went up on her toes, as high as possible. Sensations coursed through her body, her blood heated and burning every single part of her from inside out. His teeth tugged on her lower lip. A moan left her mouth. He swallowed it, stroking her tongue with his, tangling them together for a split second before pulling away again. Her hips scented into his, her hands pulling him closer as he feasted on her mouth, his hands firm and gentle in her hair. It wasn't just a kiss. It was much, much more. They broke apart for much needed air. Dinner, she mumbled through a hazed mind. I'd rather eat you, he murmured back, kissing her feverishly once again. Vine lost herself in the kiss, let herself drown, supported by him. They kissed for seconds, or minutes, or hours. She didn't know. All she knew by the time he pulled back was her lips were swollen, and she wanted more. He did too. She could feel it in his body, see it in his hazel eyes. That's how you kiss me next time, he told her, putting a little space between them. Vine rolled her eyes. Thanks for the tutorial. She caught the flash of a dimple as he turned away towards the door. She tugged him back by his shoulder and planted another one on him. That dimple was to blame. He returned it. Passion burst between them. Panting, he took a solid step back this time. Vine looked at him with shining eyes, never be more grateful of having someone like him in her life. She looked at him and felt like she won in life, as long as she is alive. The night stretched on, with them having dinner and looking at each other with sheer love and passion, until they both drifted into a deep sleep.